Most of my life was spent just surviving. I survived some abuse when I was young. We went to a crazy cult church for a while, and I had to survive the story my mind was telling myself. I grew up with crippling anxiety. I was later diagnosed with PTSD and told that I suffered from religious trauma syndrome. So, again, I don't claim to be a preacher, a teacher, any kind of guru, but life hasn't always been easy for me. And I was able to kind of reinvent myself. So if you can relate to any of this, I want to be able to help you with my story. So just some quick information about who I am. One of my earliest memories was before school. It was probably maybe 5. And I remember my parents had a gold station wagon, and we went grocery shopping. And me and my brother sat in the back of the station wagon where the groceries were. And inadvertently, I must have leaned up against a sack and kind of smushed a loaf of bread. And I remember pulling down into our driveway, and we lived kind of in a hollow. And you had to park here, and then there was a bunch of steps down, and then a walk up to the house. And my dad opened the back of the station wagon and seen the bag of groceries and the squished bread, and that was probably one of the most traumatic physical abuse situations that I ever had in my life over a loaf of bread. The smacking, the shaking was just totally bizarre. And the punishments that it even came after that. Like I remember having to go to bed and then get up and put on dress clothes and dress shoes. And we had like a window box kind of seat that I had to sit on all day just because I squished a loaf of bread. I was told growing up that I was overbearing and was told, this is why people hate you. If I talked or annoyed my father, rather, and was told, you sicken me. And then I guess I just never felt valued. I learned to read a room. You learn to search out a mood before you started having a conversation. I learned when to go to my bedroom and be alone. And I learned when it was kind of safe to sit in the same room. Because the yelling never made sense. It just never happened when you really did anything that would deserve to be punished for. Then he was kind of lenient, but it was just off the wall stuff. And, I mean, I'm probably raised like any Gen X kid was, really. But it was bizarre. It was bizarre. So I never felt like I mattered. I never felt like I was loved or liked or appreciated because I was told all my life that everybody hated me. I can remember going to the mechanics with my dad and, talking to the mechanic. He asked me something, and whatever I answered him when we got in the car, he took his fist and hit me really hard on my thigh and said, this is why people hate you. See how you acted? Nobody likes you. So I kind of grew up with that. When I was about 11, my great grandmother died. They got some kind of preacher to do her funeral. I want to say my aunt found this preacher. I don't know if my cousins were going to that church or what, but anyway, This preacher did my grandmother's funeral, and my great grandmother. Then my grandmother started going to that church, and she took me. And I was a kid, and I grew up in a neighborhood where there wasn't a lot of kids, so I didn't mind going to church. And then my cousins were there. She got my dad to go. Um, Everybody in the family quit but us. And it was one of these churches that was just so freaking bizarre. They taught that they were the only church, that every church before or since or in addition to was the incorrect church, that they were the true church of God. Every religion prior to, or every church prior to, all those people went to hell. Anybody else in another denomination went to hell. You were taught to only associate with people within that denomination. So it became harder to have friends, because if they weren't part of the church, you weren't supposed to be around them. You were not allowed to wear shorts in the summer. You were not allowed to wear any kind of jewelry. My parents had to take off their wedding rings. Everything was a sin. And I mean, everything was a sin. And they were really obsessed with what they considered any kind of sexual sin. They were really obsessed with the rapture. And they were really obsessed with you knowing that you are going to hell. The slightest little infraction, if you looked at someone, and not even lusted, but even just thought, wow, they're good looking, that was a sin. So they had really bizarre hang-ups. Flag worship. They had a flag that they would swing back and forth, that we would have to walk around the church in a circle, and they would brush the flag over you while singing about the flag. I mean, it was just nuts. It was Church of God of Prophecy. Tongues, and more tongues, moaning and yelling and screaming and stomping at the feet, and it was just crazy. I've seen more exorcism. My brother had an exorcism, not because he was possessed, but because he smoked a cigarette. Really crazy, really crazy. You were just wrapped up in bondage. By the time I was in high school, I was Carrie, like from the Stephen King work. I was Carrie. I was so introverted and backward because of this church. I remember being a kid, believing in this stuff, but I remember praying every day that God would take my life, because I was so miserable. I was just so miserable. And I was discovering that I was gay. So these thoughts led to a lot of self-loathing. It was miserable. I just was completely isolated from society. The self-loathing just continued to get worse, because you still had a father who had his own nervous issues, of course, and he was abused. His idea of punishment was to browbeat you to death and to make you feel like you were a piece of shit, on top of a church where you had a God that expected and did the same thing. It was just absolutely horrifying. My parents got out of that church probably, I think, my junior or senior year, but they ended up going to the Foursquare Church, and it was not as legalistic and cultish, but it was still very much in that vein of wild and bizarre Pentecostal worship. Very fundamental. Everybody that is different is wrong and going to hell and a piece of dirt. They say they love you, No, no. They love those that are like them. And they have no problem telling you what a piece of shit you are. And, you know, so as I grew into, out of high school, I made sure that I took jobs that required Sunday work for a while. Um, I completely left the church once I got out on my own. Didn't darken the door of one, but that's still in the back of my mind. I think I still really believed all that stuff, but figured that I was just garbage because I was gay and there was no escape. So I just lived my life. Still had a lot of, issues, a lot of inner conflicts going on. It's really my anxiety at this point had caused me not to trust myself. I had zero self confidence. Anybody that in a position of authority just made me extremely anxious. It created like this high perfectionism. So whatever job I did, I stayed in. So I started in retail and kind of stayed there. I was always told, even though I was relatively smart, I was made to feel dumb. Um, Even though I was dean's list in college, I just quit because, education was frowned upon and I was good here at this job. And as long as I can be perfect and my boss is pleased with me, then I have worth. And I lived my life kind of in that mode of just wanting validation, I guess. And after a while, uh, I felt this tug to go back to church. But also, I had been reading. Reading is dangerous, folks. Asking questions. That's how you grow, of course. And as I was asking questions of myself and asking questions that I was taught I was never allowed to do before, I started seeing things in a different light. And I gravitated towards the Episcopal Church because they seemed more human and open than any other denomination. Um, they seemed to really took the gospel of Jesus as I was beginning to see it and make it real in the world today. But there's still a lot of questions about the Bible in and of itself. Especially for those who were taught that it was inerrant and it was to be taken literal. Um, Things that you really believed but wouldn't let yourself believe, like science. The Earth being older than 6,000 years, and just allowing yourself to kind of to look in those directions started helping me to kind of break through. So it took a long time to deconstruct, but it started with asking those little questions. It started with the Garden of Eden for me. If this story is literal, if it's literal, if you take it literal, it's a setup. Because if Adam and Eve could not sin until they ate of the fruit, their disobedience wasn't sin because they didn't know any better. So I kind of started with that, well, it must be a metaphor, and kind of allowed myself to, go through breaking rigid thinking. Okay. And as I allowed myself to ask the questions, I allowed myself to see the truth. And that's kind of where my deconstruction took place, breaking me down from fundamental, strict beliefs that just really don't make sense anymore. I still had a lot of anxiety. Now, part of my experience with the Episcopal Church when I went there was centering prayer, which was really kind of meditation. And, a decade later, once my dad passed away, I found myself in a lot of mental space that just was like a blanket of despair. And I think it was an event that just caused me to kind of look at my life and inventory it and look at all my beliefs around everything and question them. And I kind of walked away from organized belief and organized religion. And I found myself in a situation of really digging into meditation, just understanding that my true nature, my true self, isn't all those beliefs. So if you have like here's your person and your religion, your culture, the way you were brought up, your education, all these beliefs were layered on my back. And some of them I didn't choose to believe. So I was able to allow myself through meditation to kind of chop away all those belief systems and look in a way at my raw self, if that makes sense. And to kind of understand that the way I was because those beliefs that I had about myself, about the world, imposed upon me through maybe the abuse that I had, the church that I went to, those beliefs had me act in a certain way. And once I was able to see that, I was able to see the patterns of why I did what I did. Meditation also allowed me not to get caught up in thoughts. So that's the one thing that is real is we allow the thoughts to become our suffering. So, for example, a work situation, I got a deadline. And I'm thinking about all the what ifs that could go wrong or that will happen. Then I'm robbing myself of joy. Meditation is just looking at none of this is happening, probably won't happen. It's your thoughts running away from you. So meditation is that slowing down, seeing your thoughts, allowing space between them. When you start to have anxiety, just to acknowledge the anxiety, but don't let the story tie a rope around you and pull you with it. So this is who I am. This is who I am. Healing is still taking place. But I would love to be able to help those who have a similar story. I would love for anybody who has had any kind of similar experience to comment below about your experience. I would love to hear about how your soul shifted, if it has shifted. And let's create a community where we can help nurture one another. Let us create a community where we are one in awareness and where we allow ourselves to create our own individual spirituality, allow ourselves to do what we need to do to bring peace to ourselves and to the world. That's what I want from Soul Shift. I want to be able to help those who have struggled with their own PTSD, with their own religious trauma. I would love to create this community for us all. So please, if this has helped you, if you can relate in any way, please, smash that like button, share this video, comment. Let's get this algorithm out there and let's build this community. Thanks. Have a great day.